If there's one fish in the area that's really gotten attention from fly anglers in the last 5 years, it's the common carp. For good reason. They're hard to catch. They're picky. They fight extremely hard. And you're going to see your backing as often as you do fishing for bonefish. It is incredible. We're going to tie one of my favorite carp flies here. It's my take on the Clouser swimming nymph. A very effective fly for carp anywhere. It imitates a hexagena nymph extremely well. Could imitate a crayfish or even a dragonfly nymph. So it's just a fly that you can tie on and probably keep on your rod all day. It's best fished in extremely shallow water. And it's a soft entry fly. It's going to just really gently land in front of those fish and not spook them, but still get down quick enough to get their attention. We're going to jump into it now and get tying on this. All right, so this nymph, variation of the Clouser swimming nymph, has been, in 2024, one of my best producing carp flies. It's a great versatile pattern that just could be anything. It could be a crayfish, it can be a nymph, a hex nymph, it could be a dragonfly nymph. You know, it's awesome. It just looks like food. But the platform we're going to tie it on, we're going to utilize like a curved nymph hook. This is the Mustad curved nymph hook. I really like these. They're actually quite beefy and strong, but they're quite skinny, so they make for easy hook sets on fast feeding fish like carp. But we're going to tweak the hook a little bit. So, you know, it already comes as like a standard curved nymph, but I'm just going to add a little bit more of a bend towards the midsection. You're not going to bend it too much. You don't want to like compromise the integrity of the hook. But if you come down to about the midpoint of the hook and just start adding little tweaks to it, and then at the end, we're going to leave it still very flat. What this will do is provide a very noticeable, almost like the tail is going to be floating in front of the carp's face. And to compare it, sorry, to a non-adjusted hook, you'll see it's very slight, but there is a noticeable difference in the bend. You can see that on camera or not. I've just tweaked the bend a little bit more to make that bend a little more pronounced. So it's a very simple fly, but it's going to provide, we're going to have to add some components to the hook to get the profile correct for the shape of a nymph and relatively flat. So we're going to add a thread base to start, and to help build up the flatness, I guess you could say, of like a hex nymph, we're going to add lead wire to the sides of the hook and build almost like a triangular shape body. We're going to add, it's going to take off a section of wire. I'm going to go back down to about the new midsection of the hook. Add in the wire. And do this on both sides of the hook a couple different times, actually, to build up the right shape. At that point, it's going to break it off. And what I'll do when I'm tying a whole bunch of these, if I'm going to tie a dozen, I'll prep these hooks in advance. I'll have, you know, 15 to 20 of these hooks at all times stored on my tying bench. Back, we're going to add a little bit more, because when you look on these flies, these nymphs, they're very flat, these hex nymphs. And we're going to tie these ones slightly shorter, so we're not going to go the full length that we did. It's just going to create the right profile we're going for. Okay, and then you're just going to massage it around to make it sit roughly where it needs to be. And you can correct the imperfections with dubbing and stuff, but now we look, as we rotate the hook, it looks kind of the same, but as we rotate it, it'll get wider. So it's going to provide a nice platform to tie on. We're going to do, we're just going to dress up to the eye and then back. We're going to add on the tail now. Work your thread down the bend of the hook quite a bit. Sometimes what's best here is just to adjust your hook, tie on a more level surface. So we're going to add rabbit strip for our tail material. It's a nice natural material. It's going to have a lot of good motion in the water movement and look really fishy. when it's sitting there still in front of one of these carp. So we're just going to take a tuft of rabbit fur. You can often pull it off, or you can just snip it off. And we're going to tie that in. Guard hairs and all, and that's the tail. Don't make it too long though. You want to be about like half a hook length. We're going to dress that right up the tail here, so that way it provides that nice look on the bottom. Now, keeping in mind this fly really looks a lot like a hex nymph, but it can really replicate a crayfish as well. So crayfish, you know, when they're sitting with that defensive posture with the claws up, this really seems to work. Wonderful fly that can imitate absolutely anything that a carp would eat on the regular. So now we're going to just trap in all that material, and we're going to add our body. And for our body, we're going to use rabbit dubbing in this case, a ginger. I really like this color because it replicates a crayfish, it replicates a hex nymph. It does everything that I want it to do. So we're going to just create a dubbing noodle here, really easy. And it's going to take a few different steps for sure to get this to the right thickness that we want. So we're always going to start thin to create that taper and then add more as necessary. Making sure when you're dubbing, you're just spinning the material in one direction to make it stick. And we're going to start off with that and see what that leaves us. So nice tight wraps, touching all the way through the fly. Somewhere around there for now, and we're going to go back. We're going to add some more dubbing to get that thickness right. This fly excels in very shallow water. Let's say 1 to 2 feet of water. It's so lightly weighted that doesn't sink incredibly fast, but most of the weight is hidden underneath dubbing, so it lands really soft on the water, barely making a ripple when it hits. And I would say it sinks about a foot a second. So keep that in mind when you're leading fish, how much distance you need to put in front of it. There's like a perfect balance between spooking your carp and getting them to notice it on the fall. Great, I'm liking this taper a lot. One more pass up. And you notice I didn't go all the way back to the tail that time, just to help create that natural taper. This is definitely a fly you're going to bring in your carp box, but make sure you have 4 or 5 of them in your smallmouth box too. Even some of these smaller lakes that I fish carp on have massive smallmouth that live in them. And I don't know how they got in there. I mean, they're a native fish, but some of these lakes are only 50 to 100 acres, and we've caught 20-inch smallmouth on them. And this nymph has taken a lot of those fish. So when you're fishing rivers that have a smallmouth population, that have a hex population, definitely something you want to pack along. So I'm really starting to like that taper, maybe a little bit more towards the head or towards the thorax here. Just a little bit more. Perfect. One pass back. It's a little tedious getting the dubbing right, but luckily it's a simple technique. Great. So I'm really liking that shape. So now we're going to add in the wing case to look like the wing buds on an immature but mature Hexagena nymph. Quite obvious dark wing buds. Keeping in mind this fly is made to fish this way, so we can invert our vise. Or if you don't have a rotary vise, just flip the hook over in your vise to make it easier. We're going to use classic turkey quill for the wing case. Great material for all nymphs. That is useful on hare's ears, and I've even tied, when I ran out of pheasant tail material, I've tied turkey tail flies, which are incredibly deadly for trout. So you're going to want to tie in a pretty large chunk to maybe that's about a 1/4 inch wide or so. Make sure that you've kept the fibers married as good as possible. And we're going to tie them in from the tip, but we're going to clip the actual tips off just to increase durability, otherwise they might break. And we're going to try to apply that to the top of the fly. And if you pull that around the hook point, that's okay, it'll remarry after. Just kind of push it around. Trying to keep it up on top here. Perfect. And then wrap back over the body a little bit to make a nice, smooth transition for when we go into the legs and the thorax of the fly. So for the legs, we're going to use just a nice hen hackle. This is like a, what's it called, the orange craw. Absolutely love something that matches the body, or even slightly different in color, but it's a good choice. The webbiness of a soft hackle is going to provide excellent motion in the water and really look lifelike. So we're going to take a pretty large one. Again, this isn't like a super small trout fly. We want there to be lots of motion. We're fishing them in still waters typically where current's not an issue, or areas of rivers where it's slow current. So having something that's webby might slow the descent, but it's really going to stop that splat of the fly landing on the surface. And it's going to wiggle as it falls and look really good. I would say a good 50% of the carp I catch engage on the fly from the moment it hits the surface. As it's falling, they come right over to it and look at it. So you want to make sure you've got some flies with good motion. We're going to pull back the feathers until we're at about the 3/4 inch or so section of feathers and tie it in at that point. Tie it in with the curve of the feather looking down. That's going to keep the legs pointing backwards, as the legs would naturally appear on these nymphs. And then we're just going to clip off the tip. So at this point, we're going to add more bulk to the thorax by adding in more of the same dubbing we used on the abdomen of the fly. But yeah, so we're making our thorax now. And we're going to just build this up to be at least equal to the abdomen, if not slightly bulkier. I don't know if the fish really care that much, but I do. All right, so that back half now is slightly bulkier than the rest of the abdomen, so that's what we're going to use as our baseline to then build the rest of the fly off of. Cool. Maybe a little bit more. Great. Cool. Now we're just going to palmer in this webby soft hackle, being careful to not break the stem. Just apply a little bit of pressure. And we're probably only going to do, like, let's say 3 wraps will be enough to cover this. Perfect. 3, exactly enough. The legs are going to be very long if you're looking at proportions of like traditional trout flies, but again, this is all about providing movement. And then before we tie and finish our fly, we're going to pull our wing case over first. And we're going to tie the eyes just in front and dub over the eyes just to clean everything up. Perfect. Apply a little bit of pressure on the top of the turkey quill, and it'll keep the fibers trapped. And perfect. Now this fly can be fished actually just like this without additional bead chain eyes. It is actually how the traditional clouser nymph was tied without the bead chain, but we're going to add on some because that provides a little bit of even more lifelike appearance, especially when you come into like dragonflies. They have very beady eyes, so we're going to use some black bead chain eyes. It's pretty small, at the 2.5 mils. We're just going to put those in on the underside of the fly. So invert your vise, figure 8, wrap in your bead chain. Just want to get it right up against the abdomen there, or the sort of the thorax, right up against there. We go. Wraps. Great. Then we're just going to add a little bit more of that rusty kind of ginger dubbing around the eyes and figure 8 that little dubbing noodle, and we should be in business. Great fly for, like I said, for carp and bass. Even, you know, great for stillwater trout, stripped slowly. They will take a whack at this for sure. Excellent. Then we're just going to whip finish behind the eye of the hook now. One thing I don't do with my carp flies is apply any sort of like head cement. I find that can increase my hookups without. Durability of the fly goes down a little bit, but these are pretty simple flies to tie. And with a couple good whip finishes, they tend to last pretty well anyways. So yeah, that's my take on the clouser swimming nymph. As you can see, it's got the profile of a hex, but the colors of a crayfish. And when it's sitting, that's how it's going to look on the bottom. Tail up in the air, belly on the bottom, and that nice soft hen hackle is going to pulse on the strip. Awesome fly.